What is the proper amount of vermouth to put into a gin martini? Well, the bottle should stare at your glass angrily from across the bar. You stay over there. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. What does it take to game at 4K, ultra settings, ray traced, and zero compromises? I've been using a 4K monitor as a daily driver since 2018, and even with top-tier GPUs, it's been a very long time since I've been able to just throw every slider all the way to the right and enjoy as frames go whizzing by. Even with a 13th gen Raptor Lake CPU and an RTX 3090, most games still need a little tweaking to reach an average of 60 FPS or above. And trying to take advantage of the 144Hz refresh rate on my monitor means making sacrifices when it comes to visuals. Is there any hope of actually playing games at max settings with current gen hardware? Or is every modern game just waiting for their crisis moment when hardware finally catches up? Today, we'll be taking a look at Yeyian's latest pre-built gaming PC, the Odachi X13, and see just how it holds up to the most demanding titles on the market today. Before we get into it, Yeyian did sponsor today's video, so while this will be a product showcase around the Odachi X13, I'm not going to omit any criticisms that I have about the system. I only accept sponsored video requests for products that I can actually get behind, and it doesn't get much better than an RTX 4080, an i7-13700KF, and a system that doesn't get much louder than this. First off, let's get rid of the elephant in the room. Craft Computing is just hawking another pre-built gaming PC again. Doesn't he know that you can build the same PC or better for less money? Pre-builts always use crap parts, or any of the other PC elitist arguments that pervade the forums. Like all common knowledge, there are roots in truth in there, but let's quickly break down why pre-builts have a poor reputation. Gaming PCs that are made by OEMs, that is, companies who actually create their own motherboards, graphics cards, and the like, often race to the bottom when it comes to quality to maximize profitability. They create PCs that, on paper, use top-tier parts, but oftentimes graphics cards are bottom bins when it comes to the silicon lottery, and compared to board partner cards, will underperform in almost every measured spec, whether it be clock speeds, temperature, stability, or even lifespan. Even a cursory glance at this Alienware PC tells you everything you need to know, with a 120mm AIO, a laughable VRM on the motherboard, and an OEM GPU which, well, let's just say it won't be winning any performance awards. And you can forget about upgrading the system, as the motherboard and most internal components are going to be 100% proprietary. System integrators, like Yeyian on the other hand, often build PCs with off-the-shelf parts. They're the same parts that you could buy from your favorite parts store, but assembled, tested, and shipped without you ever having to lift a screwdriver. Oh, oops. That brings us neatly to the Odachi X13, the latest flagship gaming PC from Yeyian. I asked at the top of this video, what does it take to run games at 4K and max settings? And well, it's pretty obvious this was the answer I was going for. Inside, we've got an Intel Raptor Lake Core i7-13700KF 16-core CPU, 32 gigs of XPG DDR5 memory, and a Gigabyte Eagle RTX 4080 with 16 gigabytes of GDDR6X memory. The motherboard is an Asus Prime Z790P, a solid performer with a 14+1 phase VRM, built-in Intel 6AX Wi-Fi, and plenty of ports for expansion. Also, it's a standard ATX motherboard, meaning if you ever needed to upgrade it, you can. For storage, we've got a Patriot P300 1TB NVMe drive. It's a Gen 3x4 drive capable of 2400 MB/s reads and 1800 MB/s writes, with very solid random access speeds of nearly 1 GB/s. Some in the community may be a little bit disappointed at only having a Gen 3 NVMe drive in here, but there's really no benefit in games to having faster storage at this point in time, even in games that take advantage of tech like direct storage. For additional storage, Yeyian opted for a 2TB Seagate 7200 RPM mechanical hard drive, and this is one area that I would like to see some improvement in, as SSD prices have plummeted over the last couple years, with 2TB SATA SSDs often being available for as little as $65 at retail. In a gaming PC of this caliber, there really shouldn't be any spinning rust in use here. That being said, while game install and load times may be a tad longer than you'd like, there's no performance hit once you get into games, as assets are moved into system and GPU memory, and only small bits are called up from storage as you play. Cooling is handled by a 240mm AIO liquid cooler, complete with addressable RGB lights on both the fans and the pump. The chassis is also equipped with 4 140mm fans, along with a complete mesh front to allow for maximum airflow through the system. While Raptor Lake CPUs are fairly untamable at the top end, and the Intel 13700KF did draw upwards of 230 watts in synthetic testing, the liquid cooler still did a fairly good job at keeping temps in check, while also staying surprisingly quiet. In synthetic testing, like Cinebench, I was able to squeeze 230 watts of power use out of that 13700KF, which resulted in temps reaching 98 degrees Celsius before throttling. Boost clocks on the CPU can reach speeds of up to 5.4 GHz, but even with that massive load on the CPU, we still managed to settle in at around 5 GHz with no problem holding that speed for a full 30 minutes of stress testing. That's actually quite impressive as a result, as the CPU will throttle with nearly any cooling solution that you put on it. In games, however, the CPU had no trouble keeping its performance cores at 5.3 GHz the entire time, and it peaked at just 80 degrees Celsius while drawing around 115 watts of power. Most importantly, it was plenty fast enough to let the RTX 4080 do its thing. And do its thing it did. Taking a look at game performance, we'll start with the most demanding title in my library, Cyberpunk 2077. More than 2 years after release, Cyberpunk is still one of the most difficult games to run with all the eye candy cranked to maximum, thanks mostly to real-time ray tracing, reflections, and all of the other RTX goodies. With everything cranked to max and AI upscaling disabled, we still only managed 32 frames per second on average, so it seems at 100% native 4K, Cyberpunk is still waiting for its crisis moment. But if we enable NVIDIA's DLSS, we suddenly get the most detailed and gorgeous rendering of this game that I've ever personally seen. 85 frames per second on average with a 0.1% low of 61. And without pixel peeping screen recordings, I couldn't tell the difference between DLSS being enabled and not. And believe it or not, this was the worst performing title that you'll see today. Doom Eternal is another game that's received an RTX update since its release, but in this title it's only reflections and DLSS that were added in. With ray tracing enabled, the Odachi X13 managed 153 FPS on average with a low of just 97. Yet again, I've never seen this game look this good, and I've played the opening sequence of this game what feels like hundreds of times over. Of course, I also tried disabling RTX reflections to get even more performance, and was rewarded with an average of 251 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 144. That's right, the slowest frame rates were still being pumped out faster than my monitor can display them. Spider-Man Remastered looks absolutely incredible in 4K, with no ray tracing required. Seriously, I spent probably 40 minutes just web-slinging around the city, watching the sun pass between the buildings. And that moment when the sunset backed the city skyline, I swear I heard angels singing in the background. Of course, with the RTX 4080, I didn't have to worry about performance, as the game managed 124 FPS on average with a low of only 78. If I could, I'd just spend the rest of this video swinging around New York City, but alas, it's time for all true believers to move on. Sim racing fans, you may want to sit down for this one, and strap in your 5-point harness while you're at it. Project Cars 3 at 4K and ultra settings had absolutely no problems cranking out the frames, with 193 of them on average and a low of just 108. This game is at its best with all of the eye candy turned to max, as reflections, textures, and even the interior car details are absolutely stunning. For sim racing fans, seeing this game in 4K might just be worth the cost of admission. If Destruction Derby is more your jam, let's just say Odachi made quick work of Wreckfest. I'm honestly still a bit stunned by these results, as most mid-range GPUs can still struggle at times with this game at max settings. Seeing any results of 1080p max settings above 100 FPS are pretty rare. Higher-end GPUs like the RTX 3070 can still hit speeds of 220 FPS as long as you stay at 1080p. The RTX 4080 managed 277 FPS at 4K with a low of just 121. That's 4 times as many rendered pixels, and it still managed to be faster than pretty much every card that I've tested at 1080p. Red Dead Redemption 2, much like Cyberpunk, is still one of the most demanding modern titles, even though its PC release was all the way back in 2019. Setting everything to max is not for the faint of heart, but the RTX 4080 still managed 100 FPS on average at 4K. But just barely. With only one exception, Red Dead also recorded the lowest frame rate in today's tests, bottoming out at 58 frames per second. That's really not that terrible when you think about it though. One of the most demanding PC games of all time, running at 4K without DLSS, and its lowest frame rate is what most gamers shoot for as an average. Not too shabby if you ask me. Finally, we've got Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, which is again an incredibly demanding title when the eye candy is set to max. I mean, just look at this statue of Queen Butt Stallion. It's a thing of beauty. Now, most Borderlands games have an issue with low frame rates when switching from hipfire to scope view, and it was particularly noticeable here. While we still averaged 105 FPS, low frame rates clocked in at just 51, and I did notice a bit of stuttering at times. In most other games, I'd still chalk this up as a win, but given the twitch shooter nature of Wonderlands, you'll either want to enable DLSS, FSR, or drop your settings just a touch to get the frame rates up to a more respectable level. But as this was the worst result in 4K that we saw today, and it still was at 51 FPS, it's hard to complain too much, if at all. Let me be the first to welcome those who dare into the glorious world of 4K gaming, and thanks again to Yeyian for sending over the Odachi for me to show off here. There was a lot of negative press surrounding the launch of the RTX 4080, and I think some of it was certainly justified. This is an expensive graphics card, no matter how you look at it, and $3,000 for a complete gaming PC like this isn't exactly an impulse purchase. But like all leaps in technology, the bleeding edge has always been prohibitively expensive. While $1,300 for a top-flight GPU isn't in the cards for most people, I also can't afford a supercar. But tech being developed at the top end usually trickles down to levels where the rest of us can afford it. The Yeyian Odachi X13 comes equipped with top-flight hardware and delivers absolutely insane performance. As equipped with the Intel Core i7-13700KF, NVIDIA RTX 4080, and 32GB of DDR5, the Odachi will run you $2,999. Be sure to check out Yeyian's full lineup of pre-built gaming PCs on their website, or by clicking the Amazon affiliate links down in the video description. Thanks again to Yeyian for sponsoring today's video. Make sure to subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Doesn't get much better than that. Mixology March continues here on the channel, and today we're going to make my favorite variation of a gin martini. And to get started, we're going to need to chill our glass. I'm just going to add a little bit of ice to that. And since I don't have a soda gun here at my desk, we're going to use some sparkling water out of a can. Next up, go ahead and get some ice into our mixing glass here. Into the glass, we're going to put 2.5 ounces of Drumshanbo dry gunpowder gin. Then I'm going to drop a lemon wheel in there. And we're going to give that a stir. Now that our glass is chilled, we can just dump that out. How much is the proper amount of vermouth to put into a gin martini? Well, the bottle should stare angrily at your glass from across the bar. We're gonna give our glass a good coating of that vermouth, and then dump the rest out. Next up, strain our gin into the martini glass. Finally, garnish with a swath of lemon. Now, I don't have my zester handy, so a pocket knife's gonna have to do. A little bit of a spritz. Rim the glass. Drop it in. And there you have my favorite gin martini.